The sound of a porcelain plate shattering against the marble floor silenced the entire ballroom. 300 of the city's wealthiest investors froze their eyes, darting toward the center of the room. Derek Carrington stood there, his face twisted in a sneer, pointing a finger at the woman kneeling to pick up the shards, his wife Ella. "Leave the thinking to the adults, Ella." He spat, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You're only here to look pretty, and you're barely managing that." The crowd shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. They didn't know that the woman trembling on the floor wasn't just a clumsy housewife. They didn't know that the signature Derek needed to save his company wasn't coming from the investors in the suits. It was coming from the hand he just forced to clean up his mess. The penthouse suite of the Obsidian Tower offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, a glittering expanse of steel and glass that Derek Carrington believed he owned. He stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror, adjusting the knot of his silk tie. It was a deep crimson, aggressive and bold, the color of a man ready to conquer. Behind him, Ella sat on the edge of the velvet ottoman, her hands folded quietly in her lap. She wore a simple, elegant navy gown, high-necked and long-sleeved. It was beautiful, but Derek had already told her 3 times that it was dull. "Are you listening to me?" Derek snapped, watching her reflection in the glass rather than turning around. Ella looked up, her expression calm, betraying nothing of the storm brewing behind her hazel eyes. "I'm listening, Derek. You were saying that the meeting with the Zenith Group is critical." Derek scoffed, turning around to face her. He walked over and loomed above her, a tactic he had perfected over 5 years of marriage. "Critical? It's not just critical, Ella. It's life or death. Carrington Tech is bleeding cash. If I don't secure the capital from the Zenith representatives tonight, the stock plunges by Monday morning. I need everyone to be perfect. That includes you." He reached down and picked up a lock of her hair, scrutinizing it with a frown. "Did you fire the stylist I sent over? This looks pedestrian?" "I did my own hair," Ella said softly. "I prefer it simple." "Simple?" Derek mocked, dropping her hair as if it were dirty. "That's your problem. You think small. That's why you're a housewife and I'm the CEO. Tonight I need you to stand there, smile, and keep your mouth shut. Don't try to talk about the market. Don't try to discuss the tech sector. Just nod. Can you manage that?" Ella stood up. She was shorter than him, but for a split second there was a rigidity in her posture that made Derek pause. "I can manage, Derek. I always do." "Good." He checked his gold Rolex, a recent purchase he couldn't actually afford. "The limo is downstairs. And try not to trip over your own feet this time. I have important people to impress. Robert Galloway is going to be there. If he smells weakness, he'll eat me alive." Ella picked up her clutch. Inside, tucked away in a hidden lining, was a small, secure USB drive and a single black business card with no name, only a golden sun emblem. "I wouldn't worry about Mr. Galloway," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "What was that?" Derek barked, opening the heavy oak door. "Nothing," she replied, following him out. "I said I hope the evening goes well." As they descended in the private elevator, Derek's phone buzzed incessantly. He smiled at the screen, a smile that never reached his eyes when he looked at his wife. Ella knew exactly who it was. Tiffany. His executive assistant, a 24-year-old blonde woman who had been helping Derek spend the company's reserved funds on trips to Cabo and jewelry disguised as business expenses. "Tiffany is bringing the revised projections," Derek said, sliding the phone back into his pocket. "She's a shark. Sharp, hungry. You could learn a thing or two from her about ambition." Ella stared at the digital numbers changing on the elevator panel. Ground floor. "I'm sure she's very talented," Ella said dryly. The doors opened and the flash of paparazzi cameras instantly blinded them. Derek immediately switched on his charm, grabbing Ella's waist with a grip that was painfully tight, smiling for the cameras as if they were the perfect power couple. But as he leaned in to kiss her cheek for the shot, he whispered, "Don't embarrass me." Ella smiled for the cameras, a cold, practiced smile. Not tonight, Derek, she thought. Tonight the embarrassment won't be mine. The grand hall of the St. Regis Hotel had been transformed into a corporate battlefield disguised as a gala. Waiters in white tuxedo jackets moved like ghosts through the crowd, carrying trays of champagne and caviar. The air smelled of expensive perfume and desperation. Derek strode into the room, leaving Ella trailing a few steps behind. This was his arena. He shook hands with minor investors, laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't funny, and constantly scanned the room for the whales, the big money. "Derek," a voice called out from near the bar. It was Robert Galloway, a seasoned venture capitalist with gray hair and eyes like flint. He was holding a scotch, looking bored. Derek rushed over, practically dragging Ella by her elbow. "Robert, good to see you. I didn't know if you'd make it." Galloway looked Derek up and down. "I hear Carrington Tech is having liquidity issues, Derek. I wanted to see if the rumors were true." Derek's face paled slightly, but he covered it with a forced laugh. "Liquidity issues nonsense. Just restructuring for the expansion. We're actually about to close a massive deal with the Zenith Group." Galloway raised an eyebrow. "Zenith, I've heard of them. Mysterious outfit. Nobody knows who sits on the board. You secured a meeting." "The meeting is tonight," Derek bragged. "Right here. I'm going to present the new AI integration. It's revolutionary." Galloway turned his gaze to Ella. "And does Mrs. Carrington have a hand in this revolutionary AI?" Derek let out a sharp, dismissive snort. "Ella, God, no. Ella struggles to operate the microwave Robert. She's here for moral support. Or decoration." Galloway didn't laugh. He looked at Ella with a strange curiosity. "Is that so? I find that often the quiet ones are the ones listening the hardest." "She listens," Derek said, waving his hand. "She just doesn't understand." Before Ella could respond, a woman in a striking low-cut red dress approached them. It was Tiffany. She held a tablet against her chest like a shield, but her eyes were fixed on Derek with possessive familiarity. "Mr. Carrington," Tiffany said, her voice breathless. "I have the files prepared for the Zenith presentation. The projector is set up in the Platinum Room." "Excellent work, Tiffany." Derek beamed, turning his back on his wife completely. "See, Robert, this is what efficiency looks like." Tiffany glanced at Ella, offering a smirk that was barely concealed. "Hello, Ella. That's a quaint dress. Very vintage." "It's classic," Ella replied evenly. "Something that doesn't go out of style after one season." Tiffany's smile faltered, but Derek stepped in. "Tiffany, go make sure the champagne in the Platinum Room is chilled. The Zenith representatives, Mr. Sterling and his team, are arriving in 20 minutes. I want everything perfect." As Tiffany walked away, swaying her hips intentionally, Derek turned on Ella. His voice dropped to a hiss. "Don't you dare speak to my staff like that." "She insulted me, Derek." "She's valuable to this company. You are not," Derek whispered venomously. "Now go get me a drink. Scotch. Neat. And don't take all night." Ella took a breath, smoothing the fabric of her dress. She walked toward the bar, navigating through the sea of suits. She could hear the whispers. People knew. They knew about the business failing, they knew about Tiffany, and they looked at her with pity. She reached the bar and ordered the scotch. While the bartender poured, a man in a dark charcoal suit appeared beside her. He didn't look like the other investors. He wore an earpiece and stood with military posture. "Mrs. Johnson," the man said softly, using her maiden name, a name she hadn't used in 6 years, a name that carried weight in banking circles that Derek couldn't even imagine. Ella didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the amber liquid in the glass. "Is everything in place, Lucas?" "Yes, ma'am," the man replied. "The Zenith board is assembled in the Platinum Room. They are waiting for your signal to begin the interrogation." "Let Derek start his presentation," Ella said, picking up the drink. "Let him dig the hole deep. I want him to feel safe before the floor drops out." "And the mistress?" Lucas asked. "She's part of the audit," Ella said coldly, Include her in the asset freeze. Understood. The chairman is ready to enter on your command. Ella nodded and turned back toward the party, the submissive wife mask slipping back into place. She carried the drink back to Derek, who was now laughing loudly with a group of younger bankers boasting about his upcoming victory. Here, she said, holding out the glass. Derek took it without a thank you, immediately turning back to his audience. As I was saying, women in business are fine for HR, but when it comes to the hard negotiations, you need a killer instinct. My wife here, he gestured to her with the glass. She's a nurturer. Soft. She cries during commercials. The group chuckled politely. Actually, Ella said, her voice cutting through the laughter, I was just wondering, Derek, have you checked the encryption keys on the prototype you're pitching tonight? It would be a shame if the Zenith Group found a backdoor in the code. The circle went silent. Derek's smile vanished. He stared at her, his face turning a shade of red. What are you talking about? He snapped. You don't know what an encryption key is. I read the brief you left on the desk, she lied. It seemed vulnerable. Derek stepped closer, invading her personal space, his aggression spiking. You read my private files. I told you never to touch my work. I was cleaning your mess, Derek, like always. Derek's hand shook the scotch, sloshing over the rim. You are pushing your luck tonight, Ella. One more word and I'll have security escort you out. I don't need you ruining this deal with your ignorance. Mr. Carrington. Tiffany appeared again, looking flushed. They're here. The Zenith Group. They're entering the Platinum Room now. Derek straightened his jacket, the anger instantly replaced by nervous adrenaline. This is it. Showtime. He downed the scotch in one gulp and slammed the glass onto a passing waiter's tray. He grabbed Ella's arm. You are coming with me. You're going to sit in the corner and you are not going to speak. Not a word. Do you understand? I understand, Ella said. Derek marched toward the double doors of the Platinum Room, Tiffany flanking his other side like a second wife. He felt powerful. He felt unstoppable. He had no idea that he was walking into a courtroom, and the judge was the woman whose arm he was bruising. The Platinum Room was aptly named. The walls were lined with silver acoustic paneling, and the lighting was dim, focused entirely on the long mahogany table in the center. At the head of the table sat three individuals who looked less like investors and more like executioners. In the center sat Mr. Prescott. He was a man of indeterminate age with silver fox hair and wire-rimmed glasses that magnified his cold, calculating blue eyes. To his right was a woman named Ms. Caldwell, sharp-featured with a tablet already glowing in front of her. To his left, a younger man, Mr. Banks, who stared at Derek with an unsettling intensity. Derek loosened his tie slightly as the heavy doors clicked shut behind him. The air conditioning in the room was set to a freezing temperature. Gentlemen, Ms. Caldwell, Derek said, putting on his best salesman smile. He gestured to the screen where his title slide, Carrington Tech, the future of automation, was projected. Thank you for meeting with me. I know the Zenith Group values efficiency, so I'll get straight to the point. Ella took a seat in the far corner of the room in a shadowed recess near a decorative ficus plant. She crossed her legs and folded her hands over her clutch. Derek had explicitly told her to be invisible, and she was complying. We are listening, Mr. Carrington, Prescott said. His voice was dry like paper rustling. But be warned, we have already reviewed your quarterly reports. We are not interested in marketing fluff. We are interested in the anomalies. Derek's smile twitched. Anomalies, I assure you, our growth is standard. We've had some heavy R&D spending, but that's to be expected with the new AI protocol. Tiffany stepped forward, clicking a remote to advance the slide to a complex graph. As you can see, she said, her voice trembling slightly under Prescott's gaze, our projected revenue for Q4 is up 30%. Ms. Caldwell didn't even look up from her tablet. Projected revenue is fantasy, Ms. I didn't catch your title. I'm Tiffany, Mr. Carrington's executive assistant. Assistant, Caldwell repeated the word, dripping with disdain. Odd that an assistant is presenting financial forensics. Where is your CFO, Mr. Carrington? He's unavailable. Family emergency. Derek lied smoothly. The truth was, his CFO had resigned 2 weeks ago after refusing to sign off on the cooked books. But Tiffany knows the numbers inside and out. I see, Prescott said. Let's look at the inside then. Turn to slide 12, the operational costs for the Project Chimera server farms. Derek nodded to Tiffany, who frantically tapped the remote. The slide appeared. You claim, Prescott continued leaning forward, to have spent $4 million on server upgrades in Nevada. Yet our satellite imaging of the coordinates listed in your expense report shows an empty lot. Just sand and cactus, Mr. Carrington. Where did the $4 million go? The room went deadly silent. The hum of the projector fan sounded like a jet engine in the quiet. Derek's throat went dry. He hadn't expected them to check the physical locations. Well, there's a zoning delay. The funds are in escrow. It's a standard holding procedure. Escrow. Mr. Banks spoke for the first time. Strange. Because we tracked the transfer routing numbers. The money didn't go to an escrow account in Nevada. It went to a shell company in the Cayman Islands, a company called Blue Sky Holdings. Derek felt a line of sweat trickle down his back. Blue Sky Holdings was the account he used to pay for Tiffany's condominium and his own gambling debts. He shot a look at Tiffany, who looked ready to faint. There must be a clerical error. Derek stammered, his confident facade cracking. My finance team they've been overworked. I can clarify that later. But let's focus on the tech. The AI is fully functional. It's worth billions. Is it? Prescott asked. Because we had our engineers run a diagnostic on the prototype you sent us. The code is filled with redundancies. It's slow, Mr. Carrington. It's a second-rate algorithm wrapped in a first-rate marketing package. That's a lie. Derek snapped, his temper flaring. He hated being cornered. The code is brilliant. Maybe your engineers just don't understand the architecture. We understand it perfectly, Prescott said calmly. We understand that you are trying to sell us a hollow shell to cover a $4 million hole in your ledger before the SEC investigates you. Derek slammed his hand on the table. I didn't come here to be insulted. I am Derek Carrington. I built this company from the ground up. Did you? Ms. Caldwell asked, finally looking up. Her eyes drifted past Derek toward the dark corner where Ella sat. Or did you inherit the framework from your wife's father and then run it into the ground? Derek laughed, a harsh barking sound. My wife. Her father was a dinosaur. He didn't know a microchip from a potato chip. And Ella, please, she's sitting right there. Look at her. He gestured aggressively toward the corner. She's waiting for me to tell her when to stand up and when to sit down. She has nothing to do with this company's success. Ella remained motionless, her face a mask of indifference. But under the table she tapped a single button on her phone. Mr. Prescott looked at his own phone, which vibrated silently on the table. He read a message, then looked back at Derek. The meeting is taking a turn, Mr. Carrington. We are not going to invest in Carrington Tech. Derek's face turned purple. You can't walk away. We have a verbal agreement. We have nothing, Prescott said. However, we are interested in acquisition, a hostile takeover. We are prepared to buy out the debt, dissolve the board, and fire the CEO. Fire me, Derek screeched. You can't fire me. I own 51% of the voting shares. Do you? Prescott asked softly. You might want to check your bylaws regarding gross misconduct and fiduciary negligence. There are clauses that trigger an automatic transfer of authority. Derek looked around the room, feeling the walls closing in. He needed a scapegoat. He needed someone to blame for his lack of preparation, his stuttering, his failure. His eyes landed on Ella. The atmosphere in the Platinum Room shifted from tense to toxic. Derek abandoned the podium and marched toward the investors, but then stopped, turning his back on them to face his wife. This is your fault, Derek hissed, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Ella looked up, blinking slowly. My fault, Derek. Yes, your fault, Derek shouted, pacing frantically. He turned to Prescott. You want to know why I'm off my game today? Why there are clerical errors? It's because of the stress I deal with at home. I carry the weight of the world on my shoulders and I come home to nothing. A leech. He pointed a shaking finger at Ella. She contributes nothing. She spends my money, she distracts me with her petty domestic problems, and she drags down my mental state. A CEO needs a partner, not a passenger. Tiffany, seeing an opportunity to save herself, chimed in. It's true. Mr. Carrington is constantly having to fix mistakes Mrs. Carrington makes. She calls the office 10 times a day asking how to pay bills or hire plumbers. It's pathetic, really. Ella stood up. The movement was slow, graceful, and silent. Sit down, Ella, Derek barked. I didn't tell you to stand up. I think I've heard enough, Derek, Ella said. Her voice was different now. The softness was gone, replaced by a steel timbre that resonated in the quiet room. You've heard enough. Derek laughed, walking up to her until he was inches from her face. You don't get to decide when it's enough. You are here because I allow you to be here. You are wearing that dress because I paid for it. You are living in my penthouse because I married you out of pity. He grabbed her upper arm, his fingers digging into her flesh. Now sit down, shut up, and let me fix the mess you caused by bad-lucking this meeting. Mr. Carrington, Prescott said, his voice cutting like a whip. Remove your hand from her. Stay out of this. Derek spat over his shoulder. This is a domestic matter. She's my wife. I can speak to her however I want. Actually, Ms. Caldwell said, standing up, you can't. Derek ignored them. He squeezed Ella's arm tighter, shaking her slightly. You are going to apologize to these people. Tell them you distracted me. Tell them the accounting errors were you mixing up the paperwork I brought home. Take the blame, Ella. Do it now, or so help me God, you'll be on the street tonight without a penny. Ella looked down at his hand on her arm, then up into his eyes. Derek, let go. Or what? Derek sneered. You'll cry, you'll call your daddy? Oh wait, he's dead. You have no one. You are nothing without me. The doors to the Platinum Room burst open. Everyone turned. 2 large men in black suits entered, followed by Lucas, the man who had spoken to Ella at the bar. But Lucas wasn't holding a drink now. He was holding a thick leather portfolio. Security! Derek yelled. Get these people out of here! We are in a private meeting! Lucas ignored Derek completely. He walked straight to the table and placed the portfolio in front of Mr. Prescott. The transfer is complete, ma'am, Lucas said, looking directly at Ella. Derek looked confused. Ma'am, why are you talking to her? Ella pulled her arm free from Derek's grip with a sudden sharp twist that made him stumble back. She smoothed the fabric of her sleeve where he had wrinkled it. Lucas, Ella said, her voice commanding and crisp. Please escort Tiffany out of the room. Her clearance has been revoked. What? Tiffany shrieked. You can't fire me. I work for Derek. Derek doesn't have the authority to hire a janitor anymore, let alone an assistant, Ella said coldly. Derek's face went from red to white. Ella, have you lost your mind? I am the CEO of Carrington Tech. No, Derek, Ella said, stepping past him toward the head of the table. Mr. Prescott immediately stood up and pulled out the center chair the chair meant for the leader of the Zenith Group. Ella sat down in the chair. She looked comfortable there. She looked like she belonged. You were the CEO of Carrington Tech, Ella corrected him, folding her hands on the table exactly the way Prescott had done earlier. But as of 5 minutes ago, the board of the Zenith Group, which I own, has executed the purchase of your outstanding debt. Derek stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. You own Zenith. I founded Zenith 6 years ago with my inheritance, Derek. I didn't want you to know because I wanted to see if you could succeed on your own. I wanted to see if you were a good man. She paused, her eyes hardening. I have my answer. This is a joke, Derek stammered. A prank. You can't run a global conglomerate. You bake cookies, you garden. I manage a $4 billion portfolio while you sleep, Derek. The book club I go to on Tuesday's board meetings. The charity trips to Zurich Asset Management. Mr. Prescott slid a document toward Derek. Mrs. Carrington, or rather Mrs. Johnson, as she is professionally known, has invoked the morality clause in your contract. Humiliating a senior shareholder in public, specifically the majority owner, is grounds for immediate termination without severance. Majority owner, Derek whispered. I bought the bank that held your loans. Derek, Ella said, her voice devoid of emotion. And then I bought the loans. Technically, I own the shirt on your back. I own the watch on your wrist. And I certainly own the company you just tried to use to defraud me. Derek looked at the investors. They weren't looking at him with respect anymore. They were looking at him like he was a stain on the carpet. Ella, baby, Derek said, his voice suddenly pitching up into a desperate whine. He took a step toward her, hands raised in surrender. Okay, you got me. Good one. You really had me going. Look, I'm sorry about what I said earlier. It was just the stress. You know I love you, right? We're a team, partners. Ella picked up the glass of water in front of her and took a slow sip. Partners, 5 minutes ago I was a leech. I was a passenger. I was nothing. I didn't mean it, Derek pleaded, dropping to his knees beside her chair, trying to grab her hand. I was just putting on a show for them, to look tough. You know me. I do know you, Derek, Ella said, pulling her hand away as if his touch burned. That's the problem. I know you steal. I know you cheat. And I know you are a bully who only feels big when he makes someone else feel small. She turned to Mr. Prescott. Show him the video. Prescott tapped the tablet. The projection screen changed. It wasn't a graph anymore. It was a video feed from inside Derek's office. It showed Derek and Tiffany laughing on the leather couch. Audio from the video. Don't worry about Ella, Derek's voice said on the recording. Once the Zenith deal goes through, I'm divorcing her. I'll leave her with nothing. I've already hidden the assets. She'll be begging on the street. The video cut off. The silence in the room was absolute. Tiffany, who was being held by security near the door, put her face in her hands. Derek knelt there, the color draining from his face until he looked like a corpse. He looked up at Ella, but he found no mercy in her hazel eyes. He found only the cold, hard resolve of a woman who had been sharpening her knife for a very long time. You wanted me to clean up your mess, Derek? Ella asked softly. She stood up, towering over him as he knelt. I'm cleaning it up, starting with you. The silence in the platinum room was broken by the sharp, rhythmic clicking of Ella's heels as she walked around the mahogany table. She stopped in front of Derek, who was still kneeling, his expensive suit pants straining against the floor. He looked up at her, his eyes searching for the submissive woman he had bullied for 5 years, but she was gone. In her place stood a titan of industry. Get up, Derek, Ella said, her voice flat. You're ruining the carpet, and since I now own this hotel chain as part of the Zenith portfolio, I'd hate to have to bill you for cleaning it. Derek scrambled to his feet, dusting off his knees with trembling hands. Ella, please, we can talk about this. The video, that was just locker room talk. I was blowing off steam. I never meant it. You transferred $3 million to an offshore account in the Caymans last Tuesday. Mr. Prescott interjected, reading from his tablet. You listed it as consulting fees for a firm that doesn't exist. That isn't blowing off steam, Mr. Carrington. That is embezzlement. Derek spun around. I can explain that it was a covert acquisition fund. It was a fund for a yacht, Tiffany blurted out from the doorway, her voice shrill. She pulled away from the security guard. He showed me the brochures. He was going to buy a Sunseeker and name it The Bachelor. He told me he was going to dump you and sail to the Mediterranean. Derek's eyes bulged. Shut up, Tiffany. You're fired. You can't fire her, Ella said calmly, because you don't work here. However, I can. She turned her gaze to Tiffany. Tiffany, you knowingly conspired to defraud this company. You countersigned the false expense reports. He made me do it. Tiffany cried, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. He said he'd fire me if I didn't. And yet you accepted the Cartier bracelet he bought with company funds last month, Ella noted, nodding to Lucas. Lucas handed the evidence package to the police waiting in the lobby. Both Mr. Carrington and his assistant are to be escorted off the premises immediately. Police? Derek choked out. Ella, you can't do this. I'm your husband. Not for long, Ella replied. My lawyers filed the papers an hour ago, citing adultery and financial fraud. And since you signed a prenuptial agreement stating that any infidelity voids your claim to marital assets, you leave this marriage with exactly what you brought into it. Derek stood frozen. He tried to remember the prenup. He had signed it without reading it closely, too arrogant to think he'd ever get caught, and too confident that Ella was too stupid to understand legal jargon. What did I bring into it? Derek whispered. Debt, Ella answered. You had $40,000 in student loans and a maxed-out credit card when we met. I paid them off. Consider that my parting gift. Lucas stepped forward. Mr. Carrington, I need your security badge, your company phone, and the keys to the company vehicle. The Aston Martin, Derek stammered. That's my car. Leased by Carrington Tech, Mr. Prescott corrected, which is now a subsidiary of Zenith. Hand over the keys. Slowly, painfully, Derek reached into his pocket. He pulled out the heavy fob of the Aston Martin he loved more than any person on earth. He dropped it into Lucas's open palm. Then he handed over his phone. And the watch, Ella added. Derek clutched his wrist. No. You gave me this for our anniversary. I bought it with my personal account, Ella said. And since you clearly forgot the anniversary it celebrated, I'm taking it back. Derek unclasped the gold Rolex, his hand shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He handed it to her. He felt naked. Stripped of his car, his phone, his watch, and his title. He was just a man in a suit he couldn't afford to dry clean. Get him out of my sight, Ella said, turning her back on him to face the investors. 2 security guards grabbed Derek by the arms. As they dragged him toward the door, he looked back, shouting, You'll regret this, Ella. You can't run this company. You're weak. You need me. The doors slammed shut, cutting off his screaming. The room was quiet again. Robert Galloway, the skeptical investor from the bar, stepped forward. He looked at Ella with a newfound respect bordering on fear. Mrs. Johnson, Galloway said, nodding respectfully. I must admit I misjudged the situation. I assumed the restructuring rumors were negative. The restructuring is aggressive, Mr. Galloway, Ella said, smoothing her dress. But necessary. We are cutting the dead weight at the top. The underlying technology of Carrington Tech is sound. It was just being managed by a fool. Zenith is injecting $200 million in capital to stabilize the stock. We'd be happy to have your firm along for the ride, but we don't need it. Galloway chuckled, raising his glass. A $200 million injection. And you own the controlling stake. I'd say you don't need anyone, but count me in. I like betting on winners, and frankly, I never liked Derek. Ella allowed herself a small, genuine smile. Few people did, Robert. Few people did. She looked at Lucas. Is the transition team ready at the headquarters? Yes, ma'am. They are locking down the servers now. Derek's access has been scrubbed. Good, Ella said. Then let's enjoy the rest of the gala. I believe I have a company to save. It was raining when Derek was shoved out of the revolving doors of the St. Regis Hotel. He stumbled onto the wet pavement, the flashes of the paparazzi blinding him. But these weren't the flattering photos from earlier. These were hungry, predatory flashes. They had smelled blood. Mr. Carrington, is it true you've been ousted? Derek, did your wife really buy the company? Are you facing jail time for embezzlement? Derek shielded his face with his arm and pushed through the crowd. He instinctively reached for his pocket to call his driver, but his hand grasped nothing but lint. He had no phone. He looked toward the valet stand, but the Aston Martin was gone. "Taxi!" he screamed, waving his arm frantically. "Taxi!" A yellow cab pulled over, splashing a puddle of dirty water onto his Italian leather shoes. Derek cursed and climbed inside. "Where to?" the driver asked, chewing on a toothpick. "Obsidian Tower," Derek snapped. "And hurry, I'll double the fare." He patted his pockets and realized he had his wallet, but he wasn't sure which cards were still active. The ride was a blur of neon lights and panic. Derek's mind was racing. "She can't do this. It's illegal. I'll sue her. I'll sue Zenith. I'll get the best lawyers in the city." But deep down, a cold knot of dread told him the truth: he couldn't afford the best lawyers. He couldn't even afford Tiffany's lawyer. The taxi pulled up to the Obsidian Tower, the most exclusive residential building in the city. Derek threw a $100 bill at the driver, the last cash he had on him, and didn't wait for change. He sprinted into the lobby. The concierge, a man named Henry, whom Derek had tipped poorly for years, looked up from the desk. "Evening, Mr. Carrington," Henry said, his face unreadable. "Elevator, now," Derek barked, rushing past the desk. "Mr. Carrington, wait," Henry called out. Derek ignored him and jammed his finger against the call button. The elevator doors opened and he jumped inside, pressing the button for the penthouse. Nothing happened. The button didn't light up. Derek pressed it again and again. "Come on, come on." "I deactivated your fob, sir." Henry's voice came from the lobby. Derek stuck his head out of the elevator doors. "You? What, I live here? Turn it back on." "I can't do that, sir," Henry said, walking over with a clipboard. "The lease for the penthouse is held by a trust managed by the Johnson estate. We received a notification 20 minutes ago that the tenancy has been terminated due to a breach of contract." "Breach of contract!" Derek screamed, his voice echoing in the marble lobby. "It's my home." "Actually?" A deep voice boomed from the entrance. Derek turned. Lucas was standing there, shaking an umbrella. Behind him were 4 men in blue coveralls bearing the logo of a moving company. "The apartment belongs to the company Derek," Lucas said, walking over. "Per tax loopholes you insisted on using to avoid property taxes, the residence is officially corporate housing for the CEO of Carrington Tech. Since you are no longer the CEO, you are trespassing." "You can't kick me out in the middle of the night," Derek shouted. "There are tenant laws, squatters' rights." "This isn't a tenancy," Lucas said calmly. "It's a corporate benefit, and we've already packed your personal effects." Lucas nodded to the movers. They stepped forward and placed 3 cardboard boxes on the floor of the lobby. Derek stared at the boxes. 3 boxes. "I have a closet full of Armani suits. I have a collection of vintage scotches. I have art." "The suits were charged to the company credit card," Lucas recited from memory. "The scotch was billed as client gifts. The art was purchased as office decor. Therefore, they remain company property." Lucas kicked one of the boxes gently with his toe. "This contains your underwear, your socks, 2 t-shirts you bought before the marriage, and your toothbrush. Oh, and your shaving kit." Derek fell to his knees, ripping open the top box. It was true. It was just old clothes and toiletries. Everything of value, the life he had built, the image he had crafted, was gone. "Where am I supposed to go?" Derek whispered, looking up at Lucas. "I believe your mother still lives in that 2-bedroom apartment in Queens," Lucas suggested. "Or perhaps Tiffany has a couch, although I hear she's currently being questioned by the district attorney, so she might not be hosting guests." Derek stood up, his face twisted in rage. He lunged at Lucas. "I'll kill you! You and that witch!" Lucas didn't flinch. He simply sidestepped Derek's clumsy swing and grabbed his wrist, twisting it behind his back until Derek yelped in pain. Lucas marched him toward the glass doors of the lobby. "Mr. Carrington," Lucas whispered in his ear. "Ella wanted me to give you a message." He shoved Derek out the door, sending him stumbling onto the wet sidewalk. "She said—" Lucas continued standing in the warm light of the lobby while Derek stood in the rain. "Leave the thinking to the adults." Lucas turned and walked away. The concierge locked the glass doors. Derek stood there, the rain soaking through his shirt, plastering his hair to his skull. He looked up at the penthouse 80 floors above. The lights were on. He could see a silhouette in the window. It was Ella. She was looking down at the city she now owned. Derek pounded on the glass. Ella, open the door. Ella! But the glass was soundproof. No one heard him. Passers-by gave him a wide berth, assuming the screaming wet man in the torn suit was just another city lunatic. He checked his pockets again. No phone, no wallet, no keys. Just 3 boxes of old clothes and a wet sidewalk. He sat down on the curb, burying his face in his hands. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He hadn't just lost the company. He hadn't just lost the money. He had lost the person who had protected him from his own incompetence for years. He was finally the man he was always terrified of becoming, a nobody. Up in the penthouse, Ella stepped away from the window. She didn't feel joy. She didn't feel sadness. She felt light. The weight of 5 years of emotional abuse, of walking on eggshells, of dimming her own light so his wouldn't look so faint, it was all gone. She walked to the desk, Derek's old desk, and sat down. She picked up the phone. "Connect me to the Asia-Pacific division," she said clearly. "We have work to do." 6 months had passed since the night the glass shattered in the ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel. The winter snow had turned to gray slush on the sidewalks of the financial district, matching the mood of the man standing on the corner of 5th and Main. Derek pulled the collar of his coat up against the biting wind. It wasn't the cashmere trench coat he used to wear. That had been sold at an auction to pay off a fraction of his legal fees. This coat was a synthetic blend he'd found at a thrift store, and it did little to keep out the chill. He checked his watch, a cheap plastic digital piece that beeped every hour. It was 12:45 p.m. He had 15 minutes left on his lunch break before he had to return to his new job. Derek Carrington, the former CEO of a tech empire, was now a junior telemarketer for a company that sold extended car warranties. He spent 8 hours a day in a cubicle getting screamed at by strangers earning minimum wage plus a commission he never seemed to hit. He walked into The Grind, a coffee shop he used to visit every morning. In his old life, the baristas would have his double-shot espresso ready before he even reached the counter. Today, the new girl didn't look up from her phone as he waited in line. "Small black coffee," Derek mumbled, counting out change from his pocket. $3, she said, popping her gum. He handed over the coins, his hand shaking slightly. As he waited for the cup, he looked over at the magazine rack near the window. His heart stopped. There on the cover of Business Weekly was a face he knew better than his own. Ella Johnson, the quiet billionaire reshaping the tech world. She looked stunning. She was wearing a white power suit, her hair styled in loose waves, her hazel eyes staring confidently into the camera. The headline underneath read, "How the new owner of Zenith Group turned a failing startup into a global powerhouse in under 6 months." Derek felt a surge of bile rise in his throat. That was his company. That was supposed to be his cover story. He grabbed his coffee and turned to leave, unable to look at her success any longer. But as he turned, the bell above the door chimed. The scent of expensive perfumed jasmine and sandalwood drifted into the shop, cutting through the smell of burnt coffee beans. The shop went quiet. Derek froze. He knew that scent. Ella walked in. She was flanked by Lucas and 2 other executives he didn't recognize. She looked real tangible and terrifyingly out of his league. She wore a camel-colored wool coat that probably cost more than Derek's current annual salary. She was laughing at something Lucas said, a genuine light sound that Derek realized he hadn't heard in years. He should have run. He should have ducked out the back door and disappeared into the anonymity of the city. But the pride that had destroyed him still flickered in his chest. He couldn't help himself. "Ella," he croaked. The laughter stopped. Ella turned slowly. Her eyes landed on him, and for a moment there was no recognition. It was as if she were looking at a stranger. Then the realization settled in, but her expression didn't change. There was no anger, no fear, no pity, just indifference. "Hello, Derek," she said, her voice smooth and calm. The executives behind her tensed, but she held up a hand to stop them from intervening. Derek stepped forward, clutching his paper cup. "You look, well." "I am well," she replied. "Better than I've been in a long time." "I see you're on the magazines now," Derek said, his voice dripping with a bitterness he couldn't hide. "Must be nice, taking credit for the groundwork I laid." Ella tilted her head slightly. "The groundwork, Derek, when I took over the code was broken, the staff was demoralized, and the accounts were empty. The only groundwork you laid was a grave for the company. I dug it out. I was under pressure." Derek snapped, his voice rising, drawing the attention of the other patrons. "You don't know what it's like. And you ruined me. You took everything. My house, my car, my reputation." He took a jagged breath. "I live in a basement apartment in Jersey, Ella. I take the bus to work. Do you know how humiliating that is?" Ella looked at him. Really looked at him, taking in the frayed collar of his coat and the dark circles under his eyes. "I know exactly what humiliation feels like, Derek," she said softly. "I lived with it for 5 years. I lived with a man who told me I was stupid every day, a man who flirted with his assistant in front of me, a man who made me kneel on the floor to pick up broken glass in front of 300 people. She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. "You aren't a victim, Derek. You're just experiencing the consequences of your own actions for the first time in your life. You thought I was a prop. You thought you were the main character of the world. But you forgot that even the quietest person in the room is writing their own story." Derek stared at her, searching for a crack in her armor, a sign that she still cared, even if it was just hate. But there was nothing. She had moved on so completely that he was nothing more than a memory to her. "I could have changed," Derek whispered, his voice cracking. "If you had just told me, if you had warned me." "I warned you every time I asked you to be kind," Ella said. "I warned you every time I asked you to listen. You just chose not to hear me." She checked her watch, a sleek platinum timepiece that made his old Rolex look like a toy. "I have a board meeting," she said, stepping back. "We're acquiring a robotics firm in Tokyo today." She turned to leave, but stopped at the counter. She pulled out a black credit card, the same black titanium card Derek had mocked her for having no limit on, thinking it was a joke. "Pay for everyone's coffee in the shop," she told the stunned barista, "and put $100 on a gift card." She took the gift card and turned back to Derek. She held it out to him. "Take it," she said. Derek stared at the card. "I don't need your charity." "It's not charity," Ella said, placing it on the table beside him. "It's a severance package. Get a warm drink, Derek. It's cold outside." With that, she turned and walked out the door, Lucas holding it open for her. The bell chimed again, signaling her departure. Derek stood there in the silence. The other customers were looking at him, some with curiosity, some with disdain. He looked down at the gift card on the table. The grind, $100. It was enough for a month of coffee. It was a kindness he didn't deserve, delivered by the woman he had tried to destroy. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was his manager. "Where are you? Break is over. Get back on the phones or don't bother coming back." Derek looked at the phone, then at the door where Ella had vanished into the back of a waiting limousine. He realized then that he was never going to get back to that world. He had held a diamond in his hand and thrown it away because he wanted to look for shiny rocks. He picked up the gift card. His pride was dead. He was just cold, and he wanted a coffee. As he walked out of the shop, the wind hit him harder than before. But this time he didn't try to fight it. He just pulled his cheap coat tighter and started walking toward the bus stop, one foot in front of the other, disappearing into the gray crowd of the city, just another face in the background of someone else's success story. Derek Carrington learned the hardest lesson of all: true power isn't about how loud you yell or how expensive your suit is. It's about character integrity and how you treat people when you think no one is watching. He underestimated Ella because she was quiet, mistaking her silence for weakness. But silence is often where the greatest strength is built. By the time he realized she held the keys to his kingdom, he was already locked out. In life, be careful who you step on while you're climbing the ladder, because they might be the exact person you have to look up to when you fall. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please hit the like button. It really helps the channel. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that karma is real, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. Would you have given Derek the gift card, or would you have walked away? Let me know in the comments below.